Hey guys, today we walk barefoot into the dust of ancient Greece. Not to marvel at marble statues or ponder democracy over olives, but to study the whispering brilliance of military minds that saw war not as chaos, but as choreography. You're not holding a joystick or a laser sight. You're gripping a splintery spear, sweat dripping from your chin, and the only thing standing between you and a 6-foot Persian with a bad attitude is a wall of men who barely had breakfast. And trust me, despite all the sandals and heroic poetry, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing when and where you're listening. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the midday sun, dust curling up around your ankles like lazy ghosts. The hills of Attica are quiet today. No battles raging, no ships burning, just the deceptive peace before yet another war boils over. And in this strangely tranquil moment, you start to notice something peculiar about how the Greeks handle their business. See, most ancient armies were loud, brutal, and stunningly inefficient. Think screaming Celts or Babylonian chariot messes. But here, the fighting is tight, calculated, silent, almost. It's as if someone thought this whole war thing through. You catch sight of a group of young men drilling on the plain below, moving not like a mob, but like a machine. Shields lock, spears angle down. They don't just fight, they perform. That's your first clue. In ancient Greece, war isn't just blood and guts. It's geometry. It's philosophy. It's terrifyingly logical. Take the hoplite phalanx. 8 rows deep, shoulder to shoulder, like some kind of human tank made of bronze and sweaty teenage aggression. You're trained to trust the man beside you more than your own instincts. You don't break formation, not unless you want a spear in your back and your name forgotten. Every part of it, shield size, spear length, helmet design, is optimized for one thing: unity. A solo hero might make the poetry, but it's the phalanx that wins the war. And here's the crazy part. No one's in charge in the middle of a charge. There's no fancy walkie-talkie general yelling, "Flank left." You're relying on momentum, muscle memory, and an unspoken agreement not to die stupidly. It's the purest form of synchronized destruction ever conceived. Historians still argue whether the formation evolved naturally or was borrowed from the East, but once the Greeks had it, they made it sacred. There's a strange, quiet genius to it, like using algebra to win a bar fight. Meanwhile, up in Thebes or down in Sparta, cities are cooking up their own tweaks on this formation. Some make it deeper, some wider, some faster. And that's the brilliance of the Greeks. They aren't one big country with a standard army. They're 1,000 fiercely independent minds, all riffing on the same bloody theme. Like jazz, but with more disembowelment. Then there's the philosophy angle. You'd think these guys would be too busy debating metaphysics to bother with sword drills, but nope. Plato fought in the phalanx. Socrates, too. Imagine pausing mid-battle to discuss virtue ethics. That wasn't a joke. It probably happened. And while you're blocking a Persian javelin with your shield, your commander might actually be quoting Homer or arguing about fate. It's like if your college professor suddenly joined the Marines and didn't suck. The quirks go deeper. For example, you're always slightly drifting right in the phalanx. It's subconscious. Everyone wants to hide behind their neighbor's shield. So entire formations curve during a charge like nervous centipedes. Commanders knew this. Some used it. Others fought it. But it's one of those tiny human things that turns into grand strategy over time. And remember those sandals? They're not a joke. Footwear mattered. Some cities marched barefoot for grip. Others swore by thick-soled boots. Corinthians even had their own laced-up combat sandals, because fashion doesn't die, even in war. One fringe theory suggests that some hoplites even rubbed their feet with vinegar to toughen the skin. No clue if it worked, but it sure would keep your bunkmates at a distance. And don't even get started on armor. Everyone had a different idea about how much bronze was enough. Too little, and you're fast but dead. Too much, and you're basically a walking bronze oven. You try sprinting 300 meters in 80 pounds of kit while your sandals are tied with string and a flute player behind you is keeping time. Yes, the flute player is real. Because why not coordinate death with music? As you keep walking along the old battle routes, something else creeps in. The Greeks don't just build weapons. They build expectations. Their enemy has to guess not just what formation you'll use, but how deep it will be, how fast you'll move, and whether you'll suddenly do something clever, like break left and stab them in the exposed armpit. Yeah, that's a real thing. No armor under the arms. Greeks noticed. Greeks adapted. That's the quiet genius you're starting to feel. It's not loud. It's not flashy. It's a slow-burning, sand-crunching, shield-clanking sort of brilliance that rewired warfare. The bronze glints in the sun, but the sharpest thing on this battlefield is not your spear. It's the mind behind it. You blink against the sun as a hot wind brushes the back of your neck. Ahead, the phalanx tightens. Shields raise with a low metallic shuffle, like a snake curling in its sleep. You're now in it, shoulder to sweaty shoulder with 7,000 other poor souls. And it hits you. You're part of a single, massive organism. And that organism is marching. No one runs. No one charges. You advance, slow, steady, terrifying. And this, right here, is why the phalanx should scare you more than any sword-swinging maniac. It isn't chaotic. It's precise. There's something bone-deep unnerving about that much discipline. You can feel the tremble in the earth, your own sides stomping rhythm. Spears bristle forward like a forest of death. You keep your eyes forward and your ears on the flute. Yes, again with the flute. That guy's keeping tempo, so your feet don't get out of sync and your whole front line doesn't collapse like a sad bronze accordion. But let's step back a second. What even is a phalanx? Imagine a grid. Rows upon rows of men, each holding a circular shield, called an aspes, not a hoplon, no matter what Hollywood tells you. It's large enough to protect most of your body, but here's the trick. It protects your left side and the right side of the guy next to you. That's teamwork, baby. You're literally betting your life on the guy beside you not sneezing at the wrong time. You're holding a spear, dory, about 7 to 9 feet long, with a deadly iron tip and a spike on the other end for stabbing backward or planting into the ground. Your helmet's vision slit turns the world into a blurry furnace. There's no personal glory here. It's rhythm, position, trust. Historians still argue whether the phalanx was an organic evolution of tribal combat formations or a deliberate Spartan invention. Either way, by the 7th century BCE, it was the method. The Swiss later reinvented something similar in the Middle Ages, but the Greeks? They did it with fewer shoes and more drama. It works. It works too well. You want to know what happens to anyone not in formation when they charge this thing head-on? They die, quickly, screaming, possibly impaled on 3 spears at once. It's like running into a wall that hates you. But here's where it gets spicy. The phalanx, for all its brilliance, has issues. Picture this. It's great head-on, but if anyone outflanks you, say, swings around the side, you're toast. You can't turn easily. It's like trying to parallel park a tank in a goat pasture. Enter the rightward drift. Remember in the last section how everyone tends to shift right, using their neighbor's shield for cover? That means your entire formation subtly veers in that direction as it moves. If you're not accounting for it, you'll end up exposing your left flank without even meaning to. But the real nightmare? Terrain. The phalanx hates slopes, rocks, trees, or basically anything not resembling a flat gym floor. Fighting in hills? Good luck. Your cohesion breaks. The formation fractures. Suddenly you're not a wall of death. You're a scattered pile of panic. Smart generals knew this. They didn't just pick any old battlefield. They shaped the fight. They lured enemies into narrow valleys, soft plains, or predictable ambush zones where the phalanx could operate at full murder efficiency. Marathon? Yeah, that field wasn't chosen at random. It was practically designed for a phalanx to flex. Of course, there's always that one guy who tries to charge early. You know the type? Young, loud, believes he's the chosen one of Ares. His spear goes high, he screams some nonsense about glory, and he breaks formation. Within seconds, he's a footnote in a very dry scroll. That's the lesson. discipline or death. Probably both if you mess up. But the phalanx wasn't just a tactic. It was a mentality. You trained for it from youth. Not just physically, but mentally, hours of drills, synchronized movement, rituals before and after battle. There's a whole psychological glue here. You're part of something larger, and that makes the fear manageable. Barely. And let's talk weight. Between armor, shield, spear, and whatever regrettable breakfast you had, you're lugging over 60-80 pounds into a fight that's mostly walking into other people. The average clash lasts only a few brutal minutes before someone's line breaks, and that's when the killing really begins. Phalanx battles are like tectonic plates grinding, quiet build-up, then sudden, catastrophic movement. One little known fact: after a battle, the phalanx didn't just vanish. Formations retreated in order, backwards, shields still raised, spears pointed. No sudden cheer, no "we won." Just cautious, strategic withdrawal. You don't turn your back on chaos. Some fringe theories suggest that certain cities embedded chants or whispered invocations during phalanx marches, a kind of rhythmic psychological warfare. The idea being that your enemy not only saw a death machine coming, they heard it too. And that's what stays with you long after the dust settles. Not the noise, not the gore, but the machine. The idea that thousands of free-thinking men could bind themselves into such a rigid code for survival and win with it. The phalanx wasn't just a tactic. It was a message. Mess with grease, and grease moves as one. You're still sweating from the phalanx drill when the landscape around you shifts, not physically, but mentally. You've left behind the rigid rectangles of traditional Greek combat, and now you're trailing a general who doesn't just think outside the box. He lights the box on fire and walks away humming. His name is Epaminondas, and he's about to blow your military mind. You're in Boeotia now, among the rolling plains near the town of Leuctra. The sun is high, the breeze smells like dry wheat, and your sandals are already regretting this. You're on the cusp of one of the most ingenious tactical moves in military history. And the crazy part? You don't charge from the center. You don't keep everything equal. You stack the left. That's right. Epaminondas takes the most sacred part of the phalanx formation, the symmetry, and breaks it on purpose. What kind of man stacks his left flank 50 rows deep and leaves his right practically hollow? A Theban with a plan. That's who. Here's the setup. The Spartans, renowned for their brutal discipline and mean glances, expect the usual. Center-heavy, balanced wings, maybe a few chest-thumping slogans. What they don't expect is a hammer the size of a mountain slamming into their right flank first. You're standing there, watching this reverse avalanche of bronze, Theban elite units in the front, especially the Sacred Band, moving in coordinated silence. The left flank becomes the spear point, the dominant wedge, while the rest of the line holds back, delaying engagement. You want to scream, "That's not regulation," but it doesn't matter. It works. The result? Spartan shock, collapse, humiliation. They lose not just the battle, but their reputation. Historians still argue whether this was pure improvisation or a culmination of secret Theban experimentation. But either way, it marks the first time in memory that the supposedly invincible Spartan line crumbles. And you're here for it. Let's rewind. Who is Epaminondas, really? Not your average warlord. He's quiet, studious, probably more comfortable with a scroll than a spear. But he absorbs information like a sponge and sees war as a chessboard no one else quite understands. He's the kind of guy who'd politely destroy your entire strategy, then help you up with a thoughtful comment about Plato. He rethinks warfare from the ground up. While others are content copying tactics from grandfather to grandson, Epaminondas wonders, what if we didn't? And here's where the Sacred Band of Thebes comes in. You'll hear more about them later, but just know this: they're elite. Not just in training, but in emotional connection. Fighting in pairs, bonded, some even lovers. It's strength forged through intimacy. You don't abandon your partner in battle. You die before that happens. So Epaminondas builds his assault unit around them. He doesn't spread out his best troops. He concentrates them. He makes the left heavy, letting it punch while the rest of the line watches, waits, and adjusts. It's asymmetrical warfare centuries before the term even existed. The oblique advance, what we now call Epaminondas' oblique order, becomes a sensation. Later generals will copy it, mimic it, misunderstand it. But at this moment, under the scorching Boeotian sun, it's still just a dangerous idea tested on flesh and pride. There's something poetic about it. The man doesn't roar. He whispers, strategically. He teaches his men how to bend the phalanx without breaking it, how to move as if water and stone had a love child. And you, stumbling along the rear of the formation, realize this isn't brute force. It's a surgical strike in a bronze world. Oh, and speaking of quirks, Epaminondas, he brings cavalry into the mix, not just to chase down runners, but to actually shape the field. On the wings, his horsemen screen, bait, and confuse. While not as flashy as the Macedonian cavalry that'll come later, this is one of the earliest coordinated combined arms deployments in Greece. Some fringe historians even suggest he used runners or scouts to signal mid-battle adjustments, primitive command and control that hinted at later Roman brilliance. It's speculative, sure, but considering how fast and clean his wins were, you have to wonder. The post-battle effect? It's seismic. Sparta, feared, revered, and historically smug, slinks away wounded. Their mystique shattered. Their aura cracked. You almost feel bad for them, until you remember they trained 7-year-olds by tossing them in a forest with knives and no lunch. Meanwhile, Epaminondas doesn't gloat. He doesn't throw a victory parade. He rebuilds Theban power quietly, methodically, expanding alliances and defending freedom like some kind of modest superhero. He even frees Messenian slaves and rebuilds their city, a move that terrifies Spartan landowners more than any sword. So why don't more people talk about him? That's the final twist. Epaminondas dies young. On the battlefield, of course, with a spear in his chest and victory sealed before he even hits the ground. He leaves no sons, no memoirs, no hungry empire to scream his name. Just stunned enemies and a handful of scribes scrambling to understand what just happened. You stand now at the field of Leuctra years later. The grass has grown back, but the echo remains. One man, one lopsided formation, and 1,000 dead assumptions. Epaminondas proved that in a world of rigid formations, asymmetry wins. You wipe the sweat from your brow and glance southward, toward a land where boys are trained not to cry, not to complain, and certainly not to lose. Welcome to Sparta, where even your nightmares would need permission to be weak. You think you know Spartan warfare, shields, red cloaks, slow-motion death grunts. But today, you're about to realize that the Spartan system, for all its chest-pounding, wasn't just brawn. It was structured genius wrapped in terrifying simplicity and a few glaring flaws. You're 10 years old. You've just been yanked from your family and dropped into the Agoge, Sparta's state-sponsored military school/nightmare camp. Your new hobbies? Enduring pain, stealing food, and saying as little as possible unless it's life-falteringly profound. Emotion? Not allowed. Shoes? Optional. The Spartan army wasn't just fear because of its size or weapons. It was fear because everyone in it had been psychologically engineered since childhood to never break formation. You were expected to march into death and thank the gods for the honor. It's brilliant in a way. The phalanx formation, which you now know well, depends entirely on unity. Other city-states train men for a few years. Sparta trained boys from birth. So when a hoplite wall locks into place, Spartans don't just stand there, they become it. There's no hesitation, no looking around for orders. Just automatic obedience like bronze-scaled muscle memory. They even had a saying for it, come back with your shield, or on it. That wasn't poetic flair. It was policy. You either held the line, or you were the line. But here's where the Spartan paradox creeps in. They were too specialized. While cities like Thebes and Athens adapted, experimented, even philosophized their way into clever battlefield shenanigans, Sparta stuck to the classics. Same formation, same tactics, same pride. Which works until it really doesn't. Historians still argue whether Sparta's military rigidity was the reason for its eventual downfall or merely a symptom of a broader political rot. But the fact remains, Sparta, for all its terrifying discipline, rarely innovated. When Epaminondas punched them in the face with a diagonal formation, they didn't adapt. They stared. Then they died. And yet, when it worked, it really worked. You're now marching with a Spartan unit across the Eurotas Valley. Everything is measured. Even the pace feels like it's been approved by some cranky war committee. Your armor is slightly different from other Greek city-states. Lighter in some parts, heavier in others, always optimized for cohesion. The shield is your life. The spear is your sentence. Your will is not your own. You remember the Battle of Plataea, one of the few times Spartan power was tested on a grand stage. After the humiliation at Thermopylae, Sparta brings the full force of its hoplite machine and absolutely shreds the Persian left flank. Methodical, emotionless, devastating. No fancy tricks. No war elephants. Just bronze discipline and cold precision. Still, the weird stuff is where things get fun. Take their kings, two of them always. One could lead an army while the other stayed home to keep the people in line. Logical? Yes. Confusing during birthdays? Probably. One fringe theory even suggests they used this redundancy not just for checks and balances, but to split supernatural risk, in case one got cursed. No, seriously. And then there's the music. Spartans marched to a flute too, but theirs was a slow, eerie beat, like war had a soundtrack composed by a minimalist with anger issues. The flute wasn't there to soothe, it was there to bind, to make movement clockwork, to drown out doubt. But here's a little-known tidbit. Spartans weren't invincible. They avoided battle when it didn't suit them. They weren't idiots. They preferred sure things, overwhelming numbers, strong ground, psychological dominance. If they weren't certain, they stalled, negotiated, or just didn't show up. Strategic cowardice? Maybe. Or maybe just quiet calculation under the screaming armor. Another overlooked feature? Helots, Sparta's enslaved underclass. For every Spartan soldier, there were multiple helots doing the farming, smithing, everything, which meant Spartans could train full-time, but also meant they were perpetually terrified of a revolt. During festivals like the Crypteia, elite young Spartans were encouraged to murder clever helots as a form of control. Yes, that happened. So beneath all the bronze and bravado was a deep fragility. Sparta's entire military machine balanced on a knife edge. Superior training propped up by mass oppression, rigid tradition sustained by paranoid violence. It worked until it didn't. You feel it when you walk through modern ruins of ancient Lacedaemon. The ghosts here aren't poetic. They're quiet, obedient, slightly bitter. The city didn't leave behind grand temples or soaring epics. It left bones and silence. Even at their peak, Spartans were wary of glory. No monument for Leonidas was erected for decades after Thermopylae. No statues, no inscriptions. They didn't need the world to know. They remembered. You might think that's admirable, until you realize it also meant they failed to tell their story before others told it for them. You crouch in the dust, now, watching a training session between two Spartan teenagers. They don't speak. They don't smile. One bloodies the other's lip with a wooden spear, and both simply nod. It's not cruelty, it's calibration. This is the quiet genius of Sparta, building soldiers who could break worlds but not question orders. And like all genius, it came with a price. Your sandals slip on the damp planks as you board the trireme, and already the air tastes different, briny, sharp, and laced with sweat from 100 men crammed below deck, rowing like their afterlives depend on it. Welcome to Athens, where military genius doesn't march, it sails. If Sparta built its power on bronze and discipline, Athens engineered theirs with timber, teamwork, and terrifying speed. Their weapon of choice? The trireme, a sleek, triple-decked war galley that looked fragile but moved like an underwater missile powered by rage and ambition. You duck your head to avoid a beam as the ship tilts. Below you, 170 men row in eerie unison. No slaves here, just poor citizens earning pay and pride by pulling oars in the dark. Your knees brush your chest. The stench is unforgettable. And yet, this is one of the deadliest machines of the ancient world. Why? Because the Athenians didn't just build ships. They built doctrine. Most navies thought in terms of floating platforms for archers. Athens thought in terms of velocity, angle, momentum. Every trireme was a guided kinetic weapon. You didn't board the enemy. You rammed them at full speed, snapped their hull like a breadstick, and rode away before they even cursed your name. And who made this madness possible? A man named Themistocles, who you'd probably love at a party but hate as a neighbor. Arrogant, cunning, endlessly persuasive, and possibly allergic to humility. But he had one thing going for him: vision. Historians still argue whether Themistocles genuinely foresaw the coming Persian naval invasion or just rolled the dice perfectly. Either way, he convinced Athens to dump its silver mines profits into building 200 triremes, instead of handing out the usual cash bribes to voters. That's like selling a winning lottery ticket to buy missiles. Bold. And it changed the course of history. The year is 480 BCE. You're floating in the narrow waters of Salamis, with Athenian ships packed bow to stern like bronze sardines. Themistocles has lured the massive Persian fleet, larger, grander, but clumsier, into this tight kill zone. The straits funnel the Persians like cattle, while Athenian ships glide through like knives in soup. And then, impact. You feel it before you hear it. A wooden crunch that vibrates up through the hull. A trireme has just punched into a Persian side. Splitters fly. Men scream. The oars don't stop. The ramming head, reinforced with bronze and built at just the right angle, tears through the enemy before the Athenians backpaddle into position for another strike. Here's the thing. These maneuvers take practice. Years of it. The Athenians trained constantly, not just in rowing, but in turning, feinting, charging. The trireme could spin on a dime if the crew worked like one body. One misstep, and you flip the ship or tangle the oars. It was war by choreography. And then there's the famous Deepless maneuver, a naval move so risky it sounds like drunken math. You row directly into the enemy line, then veer sideways at the last second to break through and hit their rear ships. It's like trying to thread a needle with a thunderstorm. But Athenians pulled it off. Back on deck, the commander, called a trierarch, shouts orders above the din. You're not even steering. That's the Kybernetes, the helmsman, working in perfect sync with the rowing master. There's a division of labor here that borders on industrial. And yet it's all manual, all human, all raw. Fringe theory time. Some historians believe Athenians trained using mock sea battles in the harbor, using smaller boats. Early simulators, in a way. They even had naval festivals where different crews competed in turning speed and ramming accuracy. War is sport, but it wasn't just about smashing ships. Athens used its navy to project power. Fast. Pirates raiding allies. Send a squadron. Corinth looking sassy. Float some triremes past their docks and wave. Naval mobility gave Athens what land power never could. Strategic presence anywhere along the Aegean coast, often within days. And all of this, the innovation, the agility, the investment, flowed from democracy. The poor couldn't afford hoplite armor, but they could row. So the Navy gave them political relevance. Rowers became voters. Naval victories meant more than territory. They meant participation. Of course, this also meant a lot of smelly men were suddenly involved in civic debates. You try discussing tax policy with a guy who smells like bilge water and pickled garlic. But that's Athens. Power through numbers, even if those numbers are barefoot and blisters. Still, naval life had its price. Seasickness, disease, sunstroke, and, when things went wrong, drowning. Triremes didn't float well after being rammed. There were no lifeboats, no rescue policies. If your ship sank, you either swam or you didn't. One memorable fact: Athenian triremes were so light and fast that they had to beached every night. No sleeping at sea. You'd row to shore, flip the hull on logs, and hope the locals didn't stab you in your sleep. But when it worked, when the strategy aligned, the wind cooperated, and the crew hit their rhythm, the trireme was poetry in motion. A floating blade, and the Athenians wielded it like scalpel and sledgehammer, often on the same day. You sit now by the old port of Piraeus, long since filled in and built over. But if you squint, you can almost see the ghostly hulls gliding across the bay. That quiet genius? It wasn't just brains. It was brine-soaked muscle coordinated with eerie, exacting grace. You're standing on a flat, open plain of Marathon, and at first, it feels underwhelming. Quiet hills to your left, the glimmer of the Aegean behind you. A few olive trees, some whispering grasses. Nothing screams legend was born here. But give it time. This stretch of land is about to become a masterclass in terrain exploitation, and a reminder that even ancient armies could pull off a miracle when cornered. It's 490 BCE. You're breathing hard, armored but outnumbered, staring across the field at a massive Persian force that just casually disembarked from their shiny fleet. Fancy armor, exotic tactics, an empire's arrogance behind every footstep. They're here to punish Athens for sticking its nose into Ionian affairs. You're here because there was no plan B. Athens can't wait for Sparta. Their sacred "we don't march during a festival" policy means reinforcements are days away. So the Athenians, 10,000 strong, give or take, do something so absurd, you half expect Zeus himself to facepalm. They attack first. Leading them is a guy named Miltiades, who honestly sounds like someone you'd expect to sell fish at the Agora, not outmaneuver the largest military force in the known world. But Miltiades knows something the Persians don't. This plain isn't just dirt, it's strategy. You take your position in the hoplite line. Here's where it gets wild. Miltiades thins the center of the Athenian formation and reinforces the flanks. This isn't normal. It's actually quite risky. The logic? When the stronger Persian center pushes through, the flanks can wrap around, like a bear trap made of angry, sweaty Athenians. And here's the genius move, the charge. You sprint the final 200 meters. Not walk, not march, run. Some historians still argue whether this was to avoid Persian archers or to deliver a psychological gut punch. Either way, it's unexpected. You're screaming, shield raised, helmet fogging up as you slam into the enemy line. That's when everything breaks. The Persians, used to fighting with looser formations and range superiority, aren't ready for the wall of bronze crashing into them like a human avalanche. The center manages to punch into the weaker Athenian core, just as Miltiades hoped, but then the flanks snap shut. The Persian formation buckles. Panic spreads. And just like that, the battle turns. You're now in the thick of it. Mud, blood, screaming. The Persian troops retreat, many sprinting for their ships. The Athenians press the attack all the way to the water, even trying to stop the enemy from escaping. In total, nearly 6,400 Persians die, while Athens loses only 192 men. That's not just victory. That's statistical sorcery. Fringe theory time. Some suggest the Athenians were aided by phantom forces, supernatural apparitions, or even the ghost of Theseus himself. Whether patriotic hallucination or morale-boosting PR, the fact is this: something changed here. Greece realized it could win, and that changes everything. The Battle of Marathon isn't just a military victory. It's a political awakening. The notion that citizen soldiers, hoplites who also fish, bake, and argue about taxes, could take down a superpower is revolutionary. It becomes the bedrock of Athenian confidence, which later fuels everything from the Delian League to Golden Age philosophy to those weird nude wrestling statues. Now about the run. You've probably heard of the poor guy who sprinted all the way to Athens to announce victory and then dropped dead. His name was Phidippides, and his story is sort of true. He definitely existed, and he definitely ran a long distance, but actually before the battle, to request help from Sparta. The idea that he ran 26.2 miles post-battle is a later romantic addition. But hey, it gave us marathons and guilt about not jogging. Still, the moment holds weight. The sheer will, the urgency, the refusal to let an empire walk unchallenged onto their soil. It all screams of the Athenian spirit. They didn't wait. They calculated, and then they pounced. Standing here now, centuries later, you squint across the plain and start to see it differently. The hills to your left, natural cover. The wetlands to the north, forced the Persians into tight positions. The open center? Bait. This wasn't luck. It was terrain turned into tactical poetry. And Miltiades? He gets a hero's welcome. For a while. But Athenian politics is brutal, and a few years later, he ends up disgraced and imprisoned over a failed campaign. There's probably a lesson there about how fickle democracies treat their geniuses, but that's another battlefield. Let's talk gear. The Athenians at Marathon didn't have special weapons. No secret sauce. Just the usual bronze armor, round shields, long spears. But what they did have was cohesion, local knowledge, and a commander who trusted that if he moved first and moved smart, he could dictate the flow. And he did. You kneel in the dirt now, tracing the shape of the land with your hand. It's just earth, dry and cracked, but in 490 BCE, it held back an empire. Marathon wasn't supposed to be winnable. It was a delay, a desperate maneuver, a last stand. But instead, it became a blueprint for initiative, for courage, and for not waiting around for the gods to save you. Your feet hit damp wood again, and the salt stings your nose. But this time, you're not preparing to row. You're about to witness one of the most masterful bait-and-switch schemes in naval history. Themistocles is back, and he's about to teach you a lesson in strategy, ego manipulation, and ship-to-ship demolition that turns the tide of an entire war. Welcome to Salamis. It's 480 BCE, and the Persian invasion is in full swing. Athens lies abandoned, the Acropolis smolders, and Persian King Xerxes is lounging on a golden throne, propped up on a cliff to enjoy what he assumes will be a front-row massacre. He's got the biggest fleet the world has ever seen. Athens? Just a few hundred battered triremes and a commander who really enjoys mind games. That would be Themistocles again, and he's playing a very different game this time. You're on a cramped trireme docked in the Straits of Salamis, a narrow funnel of water west of Athens. The Greek fleet is boxed in, outnumbered, and seemingly desperate. From any strategic textbook, it looks like a suicide trap. But Themistocles wants the Persians to think that. He wants them to charge into these narrow waters like an impatient giant trying to fit into a phone booth. And here's how he makes it happen. He sends a secret message to Xerxes, posing as a traitor. The message? The Greeks are disorganized, scared, trying to escape. If Xerxes acts now, he'll crush them. Total naval dominance, no sweat. Now, historians still argue whether this was entirely Themistocles' plan or if he was adapting in real time. Either way, the bait is swallowed. Xerxes orders his massive fleet to sail in, confident in a quick, glorious victory. And that's exactly what Themistocles wants. The Persian fleet enters the narrow straits, shoulder to shoulder, with little room to maneuver. Their numerical advantage turns into a traffic jam from Hades. Greek triremes, smaller and sleeker, can turn, dart, strike. And suddenly you're in it. You feel the water churn as oars thrash. Themistocles signals the charge. Greek ships slice forward, targeting the Persian flanks and supply lines, ramming at speed. One by one, Persian vessels crumple. Not all at once, but like dominoes tipping in salt water. You smell pitch and blood, hear the splinter of timber, and above it all, you can just make out Xerxes on his throne, confused, increasingly sweaty, watching as his glorious fleet collapses below him like a floating empire made of wet cardboard. What Themistocles knew, and what no one gave him credit for at first, was that Persian ships couldn't fight like Greeks in tight quarters. They were designed for show, for speed, for boarding. Greek triremes were designed for killing, and now they were in their element. A fun tidbit here. The Greeks named some of their ships after gods and heroes, often painting eyes on the prow so the vessel could see its way into battle. The result? You're riding a wooden monster with eyes, teeth, and a homicidal attitude. Somewhere, Poseidon is smiling. And then, the turning point. A massive Persian ship tries to flank the line, but can't pivot in time. 3 Greek ships spear it in quick succession. It begins to sink fast. Panic ripples through the Persian ranks. Vessels try to back out, but there's nowhere to go. It's like reversing a semi-truck in a hallway. Greek morale spikes. Athenian and Aeginetan crews compete for the most kills, and even the often distrusted Corinthians show up late, but helpful, like that guy in your group project who does just enough to get partial credit. In total, over 200 Persian ships go down. Greek losses? Minimal. It's an ambush in plain sight, executed not with brute force, but with timing, psychology, and narrow geography. And the aftermath? Oh, it's delicious. Xerxes, humiliated, decides maybe this whole Greek conquest thing isn't worth it. He returns home, leaving his general Mardonius to clean up the mess. The Persians still fight on land, sure, but their naval threat is broken. The Aegean? Now a Greek lake. Themistocles becomes a hero. Sort of. He gets praised, but he's still Themistocles, which means he makes enemies even while winning. Athens later exiles him. Classic. But his ghost lingers in every strategy class ever taught. Not for his charm, which was lacking, or humility, which was non-existent, but for his unmatched understanding of what the enemy thinks you're about to do. And here's a spicy fringe theory. Some say Themistocles also manipulated his own allies, that he delayed or withheld fleet movement orders to force a stand at Salamis rather than risk disunity. It's a stretch, but knowing him, entirely possible. You step onto the rocky shores of Salamis now, the wind tugging at your tunic. The sea is calm, blue, peaceful, but somewhere under that surface are the bones of triremes, their bronze rams lodged in forgotten halls, waiting for someone to remember that once here, cleverness was sharper than steel. You're learning something about Greek warfare. The real weapon wasn't the sword or spear. It was manipulation, used like a scalpel. Themistocles didn't just win Salamis. He made the Persians lose it. And you're just lucky enough to watch it unfold. Your sandals crunch over gravel now, and the smell of salt fades into something heavier, smoke. You're climbing through the hot gates, the narrow pass at Thermopylae, where bodies once piled like firewood and bronze clashed with empire. This isn't a story about winning. It's a story about why losing the right way still matters. It's 480 BCE again. Yes, the same year as Salamis, and you're part of a small force tasked with holding back a flood. The Persians are back, and this time they've brought everyone. Xerxes' army is so massive that, according to Herodotus, it drinks rivers dry. Probably exaggerated, but hey, propaganda's just ancient social media. Your commander is Leonidas, king of Sparta, who leads just 300 Spartans, though in reality, they're joined by about 7,000 Greeks total from various city-states. Still, the symbolic weight rests on those 300 backs. Their mission? Delay, distract, dismount. You glance at the terrain. It's brilliant. The Thermopylae Pass is only a few meters wide, flanked by mountains on one side and the sea on the other. Here, the phalanx can thrive. No need to worry about cavalry. No flanks to guard. Just a narrow death funnel where fewer numbers can hold off a swarm. And so it begins. For 2 days, the Persians charge and fail. Their massive numbers mean nothing in this space. You watch wave after wave crash into a wall of Spartan shields, and it's mesmerizing. Each man knows exactly when to push, when to thrust, when to step aside for the man behind him. They rotate like gears in a machine. No ego, just efficiency. Then come the immortals, Persia's elite troops, wrapped in dark armor and myth. But guess what? They bleed too. The Spartans carve through them with brutal precision, their discipline outclassing the flashy arrogance of Xerxes' best. You think for a moment they might hold. You hope. You really, really hope. But here's where betrayal enters the chat. A local Greek, Ephialtes, reveals a mountain path that allows the Persians to flank the defenders. It's a classic "the call is coming from inside the house" moment. Now, the pass is compromised. The end is near. Leonidas knows it, and instead of retreating, he sends most of the Greek forces home, except the Spartans, the Thespians, and a few others. They stay, not because they're suicidal, but because they understand the power of symbolic resistance. This is where losing turns into legacy. Historians still argue whether Leonidas had a divine prophecy pushing him toward martyrdom. or if it was cold calculation designed to unite Greece under a shared myth. Either way, it worked. The last stand is chaos and courage. You're surrounded. Arrows blacken the sky. Shields splinter. The smell of sweat, iron, and death thickens. Leonidas falls. The last Spartans fight over his body. They're eventually overwhelmed, but not broken. The Persians take the pass, but they lose something else, momentum. Meanwhile, back in Athens, the tale of Thermopylae spreads like wildfire. Not as a tragedy, but as inspiration. Salamis comes next. Then Plataea. The Greek city-states, once fragmented and ego-driven, now share a common mythos: defiance in the face of doom. Thermopylae becomes the narrative cornerstone of Greek resistance. Even today, statues of Leonidas stand with that steely glare like he's just dared you to move one step closer. And on the stone where the last defenders fell, the inscription reads, "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." You feel the weight of that. These weren't foolish men. They weren't fanatics. They were strategists of sacrifice. The delay they caused allowed for the evacuation of Athens, the preparation for Salamis, the consolidation of armies. They lost, but they bought time. And in war, time is everything. A quirky detail most people forget: Thermopylae means hot gates because of the local sulfur springs. So yes, this massive, tragic, world-altering battle took place next to what was basically a public spa. You can almost imagine the ghost of a Spartan rolling his eyes at tourists, soaking in mineral water where his friends died. Another fun but weird fringe theory. Some scholars suggest that the terrain has shifted over time due to sediment buildup. That means the narrow pass you see today, not as narrow as it once was. The battlefield was even tighter, deadlier, more intimate, the kind of place where your breathing felt too loud. You crouch in the dust where the final formation made its stand. It's quiet now, eerily so, but the silence doesn't feel empty. It feels held, like the earth here is still remembering. And maybe that's the quiet genius of Thermopylae. It teaches you that strategy isn't always about outflanking or outthinking. Sometimes it's about staying, about using location, psychology, and symbolism to shift an entire culture's perception of what it means to fight. You don't always need to win. You find yourself back in Athens now, not on a battlefield, but within a city that's thinking like a fortress. And not just in walls and watchtowers, but in pure, unfiltered paranoia. You're walking the length of the long walls, and let me tell you, this isn't just architecture. It's psychological warfare turned inward. The walls stretch from Athens to its port at Piraeus, like two stone arms cradling the city's most vital artery. Almost 4 miles of sheer don't even think about it energy. You're walking between them now, and the space feels unnatural, too narrow for horses, too open for comfort, just wide enough for an army on the move, and for your thoughts to echo back like whispered suspicions. Why build these massive corridors of stone? Because the Athenians didn't just fear enemies, they feared starvation. The long walls ensured that no matter how badly things went on land, the city could still receive grain, supplies, reinforcements, and bad ideas from overseas. It was a strategic umbilical cord, and Athens clenched it like a child in a thunderstorm. But here's the deeper genius. These weren't just defensive walls. They were offensive insurance. You could lock yourself in and still launch naval strikes from the port. No city had done anything quite like it. Historians still debate whether this was a sign of brilliance or pure political trauma following the Persian Wars. But the result? Athens became nearly siege-proof, until it wasn't. You glance at the stonework, some rough, some refined, depending on which war or contractor built that section. There's a rawness here. A kind of just get it done before someone attacks, urgency baked into the mortar. The Peloponnesian War puts these walls to the ultimate test. While Sparta and its allies wreck the countryside, Athens retreats inside, behind its walls, relying on its naval lifeline. At first, it works. They still raid coastal towns, conduct diplomacy, and host poetry competitions like nothing's wrong. But then comes plague, and everything changes. You don't smell it now, but in 430 BCE, The stench would have been overpowering: sick bodies, unburied corpses, burning pyres. You would have coughed just walking these streets. The crowded conditions inside the walls turned Athens into a petri dish with an attitude. The disease kills thousands, including their leader, Pericles, the man who built the walls in the first place. So yeah, brilliant idea with a terrifying downside. Security became claustrophobia. Athenians couldn't leave. Farms burned. Allies faltered. People argued whether the gods were angry or if it was bad luck. Spoiler, it was probably sanitation. And yet they held on, because the walls meant something. Not just protection, but identity. You peek through a crack in the wall now and catch a breeze from the Saronic Gulf. Imagine how maddening that must have felt, trapped, surrounded, knowing your fleet was out there free while you boiled inside stone corridors with rats and rumors. A quirky but true fact: these walls were built in record time, thanks to Pericles fast-tracking the project and possibly using tombstones and recycled masonry. So yeah, parts of your glorious defensive barrier might include someone's grandma's epitaph. Still, there's something chillingly modern about it all. Athens didn't just prepare for invasion. It expected it, planned for it, built it into their urban DNA. And that's a level of strategic thinking most modern cities still don't reach. The walls weren't a panic move. They were a long-term doctrine of resilience through control. Some fringe theorists have suggested that Pericles' deeper goal wasn't just defense, but the centralization of power. With everyone locked in together, Athens became a pressure cooker for politics, debate, and loyalty. He created a civic identity under siege. You weren't just an Athenian by birth. You were an Athenian by endurance. But eventually, the system cracked. Years later, in 404 BCE, after decades of warfare, Spartan forces, with Persian funding, ironically, blockade Athens by land and sea. The walls, starved of their lifeline, become tombstones. Athens surrenders. The long walls? Torn down, brick by bitter brick, to flute music and gloating. You hear echoes of it now. Not music, but grit. The stones beneath your feet, smoothed by centuries, still carry the psychic imprint of desperation and brilliance. These walls aren't just ruins. They're anxiety fossilized into strategy. And yet, you can't help but admire it. The idea of building a structure that says, you can burn our crops, crush our armies, but we'll still be here. That's not just military planning. That's defiance in stone. You stop walking. You place a hand on the ancient wall. It's warm from the sun, still strong after all this time, still whispering the same promise Athens made to itself. We won't run. We'll adapt, and we'll outlast you. The air smells different up here. Pine needles, goat droppings, the sharp crack of flint under your soles. You're no longer on polished training fields or sunlit plains. You're in the mountains, darting between trees, clutching a curved bough, and praying no one hears your breath. Welcome to the untamed world of guerrilla tactics in goat country. This isn't Athens. This isn't Sparta. This is war the way the hills teach it. Dirty, fast, and always tilted in favor of the home team. You've joined a band of Cretan archers, legendary throughout the ancient world for their accuracy, speed, and ability to make people bleed from somewhere inconvenient before vanishing like a shadow in fog. These aren't your shield wall types. They wear minimal armor, if any. They travel light, strike quickly, and run faster than gossip in a wine market. And they're not alone. Throughout Greece, and especially in mountainous regions like Arcadia, Thessaly, and Epirus, you find irregular fighters, raiders, and mercenary snipers who never cared much for clean lines or marching in unison. They fight asymmetrically. Think skirmishers, ambushers, and nighttime fire starters. If the phalanx is a chessboard, these guys are the dagger in your ribs before the first move. Historians still debate whether these tactics were born from necessity, tradition, or good old-fashioned spite. Maybe all three. When you live in terrain where nothing's flat, straight, or polite, your military strategies follow suit. So you crouch behind a rock now, bowstring pulled taut. Below, a column of hoplites trudges through a narrow path, shields clanging like bells alerting the gods. They're trained for the battlefield, not this uneven, whispering forest. You release. The arrow hits. Panic erupts. The enemy scrambles for cover that doesn't exist. You and your band? Already gone. It's not just archers, either. The Greeks had psiloi, light infantry armed with slings, javelins, and sometimes just mean attitudes. They were poor, often dismissed as second-rate soldiers, but in the right terrain, they were lethal. You tried dodging stones thrown with surgical velocity while wearing 60 pounds of bronze. Go on, we'll wait. And let's talk about those slings. You'd think they're child's toys until you watch one cave in a helmet from 50 yards out. These guys trained from childhood, flinging stones with muscle memory and vengeance. A well-thrown sling bullet could fracture a skull or punch through an unarmored thigh. Quiet, cheap, devastating. Now, a quirky detail. Some guerrilla fighters in northern Greece use hollow, clay bullets filled with lead or inscribed with curses. Part psychological warfare, part performance art. Imagine being struck in the head, and the last thing you see is a message from some bored shepherd declaring, "For your crimes, succor." Even more fringe? Some sources suggest that ambush teams would hang bells on goats or sheep to muffle movement sounds, or even disguise their advance entirely. You think you're hearing livestock, and suddenly it's arrows in your kidneys. Brilliantly stupid or stupidly brilliant. You decide. Of course, not everyone loved this kind of warfare. To the hoplite elite, these skirmishers and mountain ghosts were undignified. Real war was supposed to be face-to-face, predictable, heroic. But guerrilla fighters weren't in it for honor. They were in it for survival and results. They struck supply lines, lit food stores on fire, lured armies into ravines. It wasn't pretty. It worked. And then there are the mercenaries, the wild cards of Greek warfare. Many of them came from hill regions, offering their services to whichever city-state paid best. Sometimes they fought for Athens, sometimes Sparta, sometimes they just switched mid-battle, depending on the coin toss. You meet one now, a wiry man with a missing tooth and eyes that don't blink enough. He fought in 6 wars, forgot which side he was on in 3 of them, and claims to have once strangled a Persian with a flute string. Is it true? Probably not. Will you argue with him? Absolutely not. These were the fighters who thrived in chaos. No speeches, no banners, just a job. In a way, they were proto-special forces using terrain, fear, and unpredictability as their primary weapons. And it's not just small ambushes. Entire battles shifted because of surprise tactics in rough country. Take the Battle of Igaspotami, a naval fight, technically, but the Spartans used surprise land maneuvering to trap and annihilate the Athenian fleet while it was busy eating lunch. You heard that right. Sometimes, genius means knowing when your enemy is snacking. You lean against a cypress tree now, breathing the highland air. There's a calm here, but it's the calm of people who are always ready to sprint, shoot, or disappear. These aren't your polished city-state elites. They don't have statues, but they change wars one ambush at a time. And as the sun dips behind jagged peaks, you realize this, too, is Greek strategy. Not carved in marble or shouted in assembly, but written in dirt, arrows, and shadows. You approach the walls of an ancient city, not just stone stacked on stone, but a swirling mess of geometry, madness, and cold-blooded calculation. These aren't walls built to intimidate. They're walls built to confuse. Welcome to the bizarre and brainy world of Greek fortifications, where the phrase "keep out" becomes a labyrinth. You pass through a bastion gate angled at a weird, almost rude degree. Why? So that anyone charging through has to turn, exposing their unshielded side. You didn't just walk into a city. You walked into a murder funnel designed by someone who probably enjoyed puzzles a little too much. This is where you start noticing the weird stuff. Walls in cities like Messini, Aegosthena, and Eleuthery aren't straight. They twist, bend, double back. Some corners are sharp, others oddly rounded. Towers are placed at mathematically jarring intervals. Historians still argue whether these layouts were experimental or derived from Near Eastern influences, but one thing's clear. These aren't walls. They're anti-army mazes. You walk the perimeter of Messini's ancient fortifications now. The stones are huge. Ashlar blocks fitted so tightly you can't slip a knife between them. It's engineering worthy of modern praise. And yet the Greeks did it with chisels, sweat, and whatever divine math possessed their architects. Inside the walls, you notice something stranger, towers that jut out awkwardly, as if the builder had a panic attack halfway through. But there's genius here. These towers allow flanking fire on any enemies approaching the wall. Crossbow-style murder from above and the sides. And speaking of murder, you reach a sally port, a tiny hidden door tucked into the side of the fortification. It's used for counterattacks or sneaky exits. If you weren't looking for it, you'd miss it. The defenders didn't just think about keeping enemies out. They planned for surprise exits to ruin your day. Fun detail? Some of these walls incorporated false gates, literal architectural trolls. A wide, tempting entrance leads you directly into a dead-end killing zone, the ancient Greek equivalent of click here to claim your free prize. Only the prize is a javelin in the spleen. You climb up a preserved section now, imagining the logistics. How they build this? How do they maintain it? The answer, usually, everybody pitched in. Fortification wasn't just a government project. It was a civic obsession. Walls meant independence. No walls? You were just waiting to get sacked. Take roads, for example. Its city planners were notorious for fusing urban beauty with death geometry. Roads widened and narrowed intentionally. Civic spaces doubled as choke points. Even temples were sometimes fortified. Just imagine praying while knowing a clever enemy might use your altar as cover. Then there's Delphi, not exactly a war city. But even here, the sacred precinct is built on levels, with winding paths and vantage points designed to keep both pilgrims and invaders mildly disoriented. Some fringe theories suggest that certain city layouts were inspired by Pythagorean harmonics, like cities tuned to confuse with spatial rhythms. Probably overthinking it. But then again, this is the culture that invented both geometry and smugness. You reach a fortified hilltop now, perhaps Acrocorinth or Larissa in Argos, places where height becomes dominance. These acropolis weren't just spiritual centers. They were strategic summits. From up here, you could see entire battlefields, valleys, enemy movements. It's the bird's eye advantage that changes how you fight and when. But walls weren't just about military defense. They were also psychological barriers. You build something tall enough, thick enough, weird enough, and it stops being a structure. It becomes a statement. We are here. We will not be moved. Also, we've got a stone labyrinth that hates you. A quirky little known feature? Some city walls included resonance chambers, hollow spaces built into the stone that might have carried vibrations or amplified footsteps. Whether for defense, surveillance, or eerie intimidation, no one really knows. But imagine sneaking up to a wall only to hear your own heartbeat echoing like a drum solo. Yeah, no thanks. And of course, we can't forget boiling oil. While it's more medieval in fame, some Greek cities use heated sand or pitch. Easier to prepare, just as horrifying. You try getting that out of your armor creases. You sit now on a sun-warmed stone near the base of a crumbling gate. The artistry is undeniable. This wasn't brute force construction. This was thinking several steps ahead, building walls not as ends, but as active participants in battle. Structures that didn't just repel attackers, they punished them for trying. Modern military engineers still study these layouts. They weren't perfect, but they evolved. As siege weapons advanced, so did the walls. They weren't frozen in time. They responded, just like the minds that built them. So the next time you hear defensive wall, don't think of a bland barrier. Think of a sentient stone machine designed by caffeine-deprived geniuses with a vendetta against straight lines. Because in Greece, even the geometry was lethal. You duck as a massive rock, probably the size of your childhood guilt, whistles overhead and smashes into the side of a gatehouse with a sickening crunch. Welcome to siegecraft, ancient Greek style, where walls are challenged not with polite knocks but with physics, rage, and a surprising amount of philosophical debate afterward. You're inside a besieged city now, and your job today is simple. Survive while engineers try to outmath each other across moats and rubble. See, for all their love of open field phalanx clashes and naval brilliance, the Greeks eventually had to face the ugly truth. If someone's behind a wall, you need tools, not just bravado. And no, they got creative. You hear the thud of a ballista, the ancient ancestor of the crossbow, scaled up to house-sized proportions. It hurls heavy bolts with terrifying speed, turning enemy archers into human kebabs. Beside it, a group of engineers adjust tension ropes, cursing the wind and the apparent lack of properly straight timber. These siege weapons weren't just slapped together. They were precision machines. The Greeks used torsion power, storing energy in twisted bundles of sinew or hair. Yes, hair. Some sources say women donated their braids for the cause. This wasn't just war. This was physics with sharp objects. But let's rewind. Siegecraft starts simply: surround the city. Cut off supply lines. Wait. In some cases, that was enough. Starvation warfare was common, especially if the city lacked a secret well or friendly trade partner. But that could take months, even years. So why wait when you can build a Helepolis, a giant siege tower? You're now standing inside one. It creaks as it's pushed forward by sheer manpower. Arrows clatter against the outer plating, sometimes metal, sometimes rawhide soaked in vinegar to resist fire. You're ascending floor by floor, protected, with archers at each level returning fire. Think medieval tank, but flammable and a lot more dramatic. Some towers even had drawbridges up top that dropped onto the enemy wall, allowing troops to pour over like angry syrup. It sounds ridiculous until it works. And if you didn't want to build up, you could always go under. Sapping involved digging tunnels under walls, then burning the supports to collapse sections from below. You lie flat in a claustrophobic tunnel now, listening for enemy counterminers. The silence is worse than any battle noise, because the moment you hear a tap, 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 you know someone else is trying the exact same thing, in reverse. One fringe theory suggests some engineers used goat skins filled with smoke to flush enemies out of tunnels. Yes, ancient Greece had tactical goat bladders. The more you know. But the most underestimated siege weapon? Fire. Greek cities had wooden gates, wooden rooftops, and often poorly managed fire protocols. A few flaming arrows and a stiff breeze could change everything. Whole districts could be lost before anyone even picked up a sword. That's why countermeasures evolved. You spot defenders using massive grappling hooks to yank siege ladders off the walls. Others dump scalding sand, easier to heat than oil and just as painful. Still others fling ceramic pots filled with lime that, when broken, produce choking clouds. Chemical warfare, ancient edition. Amid all this chaos, something surreal happens. One moment, dodging siege bolts. The next, two enemy engineers across the field pause their construction to debate pulley theory. No, seriously. There are recorded cases of enemy engineers meeting after battles, not for revenge, but to compare notes. How did you get the angle on your catapult just right? Oh, we use an olive wood crankshaft instead of ash, less splintering. Science by carnage. And then there are the philosophers. Because of course there are. Some cities had siege advisors who were also logicians or math teachers. You imagine Pythagoras peeking over a wall mid-siege, calculating the parabolic arc of a trebuchet and muttering, "Fascinating." One quirky fact: in some particularly long sieges, opposing sides chatted between bombardments. The quiet genius here? Psychological war as banter. Hope you're enjoying that salted fish. It's your last. Nice tower. Shame if it burned. It wasn't just about killing. It was about rattling nerves. Historians still argue whether Greek siege tactics were mostly borrowed from the East, especially Persia, or developed organically. The truth is probably both. Greeks loved importing ideas, then tweaking them, especially if they could improve the efficiency or make it just a little more dramatic. You're on the wall now, looking down at the chaos. The enemy is building a ram, not a battering ram. A literal frame with a heavy, swinging log, often tipped with bronze and covered to shield the men beneath from arrows. They push it forward under a roof of wet hides. Each thud against the gate sends dust raining from the arch above you. And yet, the defenders don't panic. They know their gate is double reinforced, that the alley beyond is a killing ground lined with sharp corners, narrow passes, and archers ready to paint the streets red. The ram might break through, but the men behind it won't leave with their bones unbent. That's Greek siegecraft for you. Not just walls and weapons, but anticipation. Everything built with failure in mind. If the outer gate fails, here's the inner. If the tower falls, here's the tunnel. Plan after plan, strategy stacked on strategy. You sit now in the shadow of a half-collapsed catapult. The siege is over. The defenders held. Barely, but they did. Because someone somewhere didn't just ask, how do we kill them? They asked, how long can we make them suffer first? You're in the middle of nowhere now. No city walls, no disciplined ranks. Just a flickering campfire surrounded by mercenaries, madmen, and people who make their living being terrifyingly unpredictable. Welcome to the wilder edge of Greek warfare, where strategy doesn't just bend. It occasionally does cartwheels on a wine jug. These aren't your hoplite heroes. These are the freelancers of the battlefield. Men, and sometimes women, who fight for coin, not country. Loyalty measured in drachmas, not patriotism. 1 minute they're with you, the next, they're not. And your new enemy just brought your playbook with them. You sit across from a grizzled Arcadian with half an ear and the smell of goat cheese baked into his armor. He claims to have fought for Athens, Persia, and a pirate queen who once fed her enemies to seagulls. You believe him because he's currently sharpening a blade that looks like it was stolen from a temple offering. The Greeks had no shortage of these types. In fact, entire mercenary bands would form from out-of-work soldiers after a campaign. Got hoplite gear and nowhere to be? Congratulations, you're now a contractor. One of the most famous of these groups? The 10,000. No, not a comic book team. They were Greek mercenaries hired by Cyrus the Younger to help seize the Persian throne. Spoiler, Cyrus dies. The Greeks are stranded deep in enemy territory, surrounded, leaderless. And what do? March home, all of them, through Persia, fighting their way back like a myth come to life. It's chronicled in Xenophon's Anabasis, which reads like the world's grumpiest travel blog. They crossed deserts, mountains, freezing rivers, all while being hunted. Historians still argue whether Xenophon was playing up the drama to secure future book sales, or if the whole thing really was that epic. Either way, it proved one thing. Greek mercs were built different. But it wasn't just muscle. These mercenaries were tactical shapeshifters. They didn't always follow phalanx rules. Some preferred open formations, ambushes, or night raids. Others brought in foreign tactics, Persian horse archery, Thracian shock charges, even Scythian poison arrows dipped in rot. You thought hoplites were scary? Try fighting someone who poisons your breakfast oats. And then there's the madness. You meet a man who claims he once convinced a whole city to surrender by painting pigs blue and releasing them at dawn. No one knows why it worked. It just did. Another swears by wearing a fox pelt because it confuses enemy dreams. These aren't tactics you find in military academies. This is chaotic genius with a dash of goat. A quirky favorite? Some bands used animal mimicry, like bleating like sheep to draw out guards at night. Or in one probably apocryphal but delightful tale, a commander reportedly had his troops fake drunkenness before an ambush, luring enemies into thinking they were vulnerable. They weren't. There's a term in modern gaming for this: mushroom tactics. Sudden, weird, and growing where they shouldn't. The Greeks didn't call it that, but they embodied it. These mercenaries made chaos into a military doctrine. You now march with a Thracian group hired by a Corinthian noble. Their shields are small, their swords curved, and they paint their faces before battle. Not for ritual, for fear. They want you to think they're mad, uncontrollable. You can't form a strategy against someone who won't follow the rules. And here's where it gets dangerously clever. While traditional armies rely on clear structure, mercenary bands use fluid command. Leaders change based on need. The best archer leads the ambush. The strongest man leads the charge. The sneakiest decides the camp layout. It's competence-based chaos, and it works because it adapts faster than a hoplite unit ever could. Some fringe theories suggest mercenary commanders studied foreign astrology to pick battle days. thinking that if your enemy believed Tuesday was cursed, you attack Tuesday. You may roll your eyes, but if it scared even one hoplite into hesitation, it's a win. Now, not all mercs were wild. Some were methodical, experienced, almost polite. These were the career soldiers who treated war like carpentry. Precise, practical, no drama. They'd build trenches, plot angles, reinforce bridges, all while casually betting on whether your left flank would break by breakfast. But mercenaries were also risky business. Hire the wrong crew, and they might turn on you mid-battle. Or worse, get bought by your enemy with better wine. That happened more than once. Loyalty in this world is as brittle as a dried figure. You sit again by the fire. Across from you, the mercenaries drink, joke, sharpen blades. They're not in it for ideals, but their tactical brilliance, born of hunger, desperation, and not a little madness, rewrote how battles unfolded. Because when you strip away the poetry, the polished shields, and the statues, Greek warfare wasn't just about honor. Sometimes, it was about who could throw a better rock in the dark and vanish before dawn. You feel the battlefield tilt, literally and metaphorically, as you step into the fields of Leuctra. The sun is high, the Spartan shields are shining, and you, standing in the Theban line, are about to witness one of the most humiliating, logic-defying defeats in military history. It's called the Battle of Leuctra, but it might as well be called How to Break Sparta in One Weird Trick. You already met Epaminondas back in Section 3, quiet, thoughtful, and secretly dangerous with graph paper. But now you get the full view of his brilliance, because this is the battle that cements his legacy and shatters Sparta's reputation like an amphora in a bar fight. Here's the setup. It's 371 BCE. Sparta's getting uppity again, marching north to remind Thebes who's boss. The Thebans, newly cocky and still licking their wounds from years of Spartan dominance, meet them head-on near Leuctra. The numbers are lopsided. The Spartans have more men, more allies, more swagger. And yet, you stand in the Theban ranks and something looks wrong. The line is crooked, or rather, slanted. Epaminondas doesn't array his forces evenly across the field like any normal Greek commander. He stacks the left, putting his strongest troops, the elite sacred band, and all the good vibes, against the Spartan right, where the king himself, Cleombrotus, stands. Now pause here. In traditional Greek battle etiquette, the right flank is the place of honor, typically the most powerful part of any army. Epaminondas doesn't just attack it. He piles 50 rows deep into it, like putting all your chips on one punch. This is the oblique order, that sideways sledgehammer strategy he'd tested before but now unleashes at full power. Historians still argue whether this was pure premeditated genius or a moment of improvisational brilliance. Either way, when the battle begins, the Theban line doesn't charge forward. It slides left, smashing into the Spartan elite like a divine slap. You're jostled from side to side as the formation moves, not like a mob, but like a single massive creature. Your spear jabs forward. You can hear the grunt of the sacred band pushing, hear the crunch of shield on shield, and then collapse. The Spartan right flank buckles. Their king? Dead. Not just killed in action, but shamed. The Spartans, so used to making others run, suddenly find themselves on the wrong end of a steamroller wrapped in bronze and revenge. And the rest of the Theban line doesn't even engage. That's the beauty of the tactic. The entire battle hinges on the overwhelming pressure at one point, while the rest of the army just stands there like stage props. Once the Spartan elite folds, their allies start thinking, maybe this isn't my fight. And just like that, the so-called invincibles are in retreat. You chase the enemy across the dusty plain, heart pounding, disbelief everywhere. Because Sparta just got body checked into political irrelevance by a lopsided wedge of Thebans. Here's the thing. Leuctra isn't just a victory. It's a doctrine shift. For centuries, Greek battles were mirrors. Both armies lined up symmetrically and slugged it out in manly equality. Epaminondas took that mirror, smashed it, and rearranged the shards into something smarter. He targeted leadership, stacked strength, and ignored ego. Fringe detail? Some scholars suggest Epaminondas had astrological guidance for battle timing, consulting Theban seers to pick the right day and even the right hour. Hey, when you're taking down Sparta, why not bring the stars with you? Also, remember the sacred band? They're not just elite warriors. They're bonded pairs, often lovers, trained to fight with the kind of coordination that only trust and possibly shared laundry can bring. Their role at Leuctra wasn't symbolic. They were the tip of the spear, and they didn't just fight, they obliterated. Another curious note? Spartan morale never fully recovered. Leuctra wasn't just a defeat. It was a psychic wound. The myth of Spartan invincibility, carefully cultivated over generations, was shattered in one battle. Other city-states took notice. Suddenly, Sparta wasn't untouchable. It was tarnished bronze. After the dust settles, you walk the battlefield. Bodies are being gathered. Stories are already morphing into legend. And standing among the Thebans, Epaminondas doesn't boast, doesn't posture. He's already planning the next campaign, the next reform, the next idea. Because Leuctra wasn't an accident, it was a thesis statement. You sit on a fallen shield now, letting the enormity of it settle. One shift, one angle formation, and the entire military balance of Greece just tilted. The Spartans will never lead again. And Thebes? For one brief, blinding moment, they hold the spotlight. Because sometimes the most dangerous man on the field isn't the loudest. It's the one who tilts his army sideways and smiles quietly while doing it. You're polishing your bronze helmet now, but this time not out of duty or fear. You do it with a certain pride, because you're no longer just a soldier. You're part of the backbone of democracy. You're a hoplite, sure, but more importantly, you're a citizen. And that shield of yours? It doesn't just protect your body. It protects your vote. Welcome to the rise of the hoplite middle class, the unsung, sandal-wearing taxpayers who turned Greek battlefields into voting booths and military service into political leverage. It's easy to think of Greek warfare as a game of kings, tyrants, and generals with unnecessarily long beards. But by the 6th century BCE, something strange and quietly revolutionary was happening. Regular dudes were arming themselves and demanding a say. You're one of them. You own land, just enough to afford a shield, spear, and maybe a goat that listens sometimes. You can't hire a mercenary to fight for you, and you don't get golden armor passed down from Zeus. But you can afford the bare minimum to stand in the line. And in Greece, that means everything. This wasn't just a military shift. It was a social earthquake. In most cultures, the army served the elite. But Greek city-states, especially Athens, began building armies that required broad participation. You want soldiers? You need the farmers. You want those farmers to risk dying in a meat grinder of bronze? Then you better give them a reason. And so, the hoplite class, the Zeugitai, as the Athenians called them, became central to political reforms. The very structure of the phalanx, with its strict dependency on everyone pulling their weight, mirrored the ideals of collective governance. No one could slack off. No one could win alone. Historians still argue whether the phalanx created democracy or democracy created the phalanx. It's probably a bit of both. But there's no denying that shared military service pushed Greek cities, especially Athens, toward a political model where more people had a voice. You're at an assembly meeting now, post-battle. Your legs still ache. Your left arm's bruised from where a neighbor's shield kept smacking you. But you show up because you have the right to vote on strategy, taxes, and treaties. You even heckle that pompous rich guy who tried to skip formation because his sandals were custom. That's the power shift. Military inclusion leads to civic inclusion. Hoplites didn't just fight for Greece. They became Greece. And it wasn't just Athens. Other city-states followed suit, though some grumbled more than others. Sparta, of course, had its own rigid system, but even there, the idea that every citizen was expected to fight shaped how they governed themselves. A quirky little fact? The word idiots in Greek, where we get idiot, originally meant someone who didn't participate in civic life. If you didn't fight, vote, or engage, you were seen as disconnected, lesser. In ancient Greece, the real idiots were the ones who sat out. Even the shape of the hoplite shield, The aspies, round and covering both you and the man beside you, symbolized unity and interdependence. It wasn't built for glory. It was built for teamwork. You didn't protect yourself. You protected your neighbor. That's democracy with bronze edges. But this had consequences too. Wars started lasting longer. Armies grew larger. And more political voices meant more debates, more votes, and sometimes more hesitation. You've sat through debates where men argued for weeks over a campaign that should have taken days to approve. Efficiency? Not always. Representation? Constant. And then there's the rise of ostracism, the democratic process where citizens voted to exile someone for 10 years. Imagine serving next to a guy in the phalanx, then voting to kick him out of the city 2 months later. Greek democracy. Messy, personal, and armed. Still, the symbolic power of the hoplite remained potent. The act of donning armor wasn't just patriotic, it was political theater. You were stepping into the public arena, shield first, and every thrust of your spear reinforced your right to speak. One fringe theory suggests that some hoplites customized their shields with civic slogans, like freedom through unity or this side up. Not common, but possible. After all, graffiti shows up everywhere, even in war. But the quiet genius here? It's the feedback loop. Military service feeds citizenship. Citizenship fuels political investment. Political investment demands better military outcomes. You, the farmer-turned-hoplite, are now part of the strategy, not just the sword. And so, you're no longer just some guy in the line. You're a stakeholder. When your city proposes a risky campaign, you don't just nod and march. You ask questions. You demand justification. You want accountability because that next battlefield might be where your brother, your neighbor, where you end up bleeding in the dirt. You look down at your shield now, dented and worn. Not glamorous, but it represents something bigger than armor. It's the silent ballad of ancient warfare. You're gripping your spear tighter now, but not because you're afraid. No, this time, you trust the man next to you with your life. Not just because he's well-trained, not just because he's brave, but because you love him. Welcome to the world of the sacred band of Thebes, possibly the most badass, emotionally bonded fighting unit in all of Greek history. Forget bromance. This is battlefield intimacy with tactical consequences. You're one of 300 men, paired off into 150 couples, trained not just to fight beside each other, but to fight for each other. And if you're smirking, you clearly haven't seen what happens when someone threatens a man's partner in a phalanx. It's not poetry. It's anatomically targeted vengeance. Found in the early 4th century BCE, the sacred band wasn't just elite, it was revolutionary. While other cities built armies on wealth, class, or blind obedience, Thebes built its secret weapon on affection, loyalty, and bone-deep emotional bonds. And it worked. You and your partner trained daily, spear drills, shield work, ambush tactics. But you also live together, eat together, share victories, mourn losses. You're not assigned a random tent mate. You're matched with someone you trust so completely that the very idea of retreating while they fight is worse than death. Historians still debate whether every pair was romantic, platonic, or somewhere in between. But what's clear is that the structure worked. Love, in all its complex forms, turned soldiers into unbreakable links in a living chain. You're now standing in the formation at Tegera, a minor battle that becomes the sacred band's first field test. You're massively outnumbered. The Theban commander considers retreat, but the band stands firm. Not with bravado, but with that chilling kind of quiet confidence usually reserved for lions. And then the band charges. You feel your heartbeat match your partner's. The shields move as one. The enemy falters, not because you're faster, but because you're closer. Closer in formation, closer in emotion. You know without looking where your partner's spear will strike. And when the dust settles, victory, against impossible odds. That's when people start paying attention. The sacred band becomes more than just a unit. It becomes a symbol of defiance, of unity, of the power of human connection forged into battlefield steel. One quirky story claims that Theban youths trained with their lovers by writing poems of war and reading them aloud during physical drills. It sounds ridiculous, until you remember that psychological motivation in combat often matters more than raw strength. If a shield wall is made of bronze, a soldier's courage is made of stories. And the band wasn't just cuddly in armor. They were tactically ruthless. At Leuctra, they lead the crushing left flank charge against Sparta's elite. They're the spear point that tears through Cleombrotus and his personal guard. Historians still argue whether the band's placement was symbolic or purely strategic. But either way, they broke the unbreakable. And the irony? The Spartans, who trained their boys from age 7 and praised emotional detachment, fell to a unit that weaponized the very thing Sparta tried to suppress: intimacy. But every rise has its fall. Fast forward to 338 BCE, Battle of Chaeronea. You're there again, this time older, grayer, but still fighting beside the man who knows your footwork better than you do. Across the field is Philip II of Macedon and his teenage son Alexander. The Theban line holds. The sacred band digs in. And then Alexander charges. With cavalry, with momentum, with tactical genius learned from watching Epaminondas, ironically, the Theban line breaks. But the sacred band? They don't move. They die where they stand. All 300 of them. They're buried together, side by side, in a mass grave. The site becomes sacred, not just to Thebes, but to history. Even Philip, usually not one for sentiment, reportedly stands over their bodies and weeps, saying, "Perish any man who suspects that these men did or suffered anything unseemly." You walk that graveyard now, the Lion of Chaeronea towering overhead, built to honor the band. The field is quiet. The grass has grown, but the silence hums with memory. Fringe theory? Some modern scholars believe the band's real genius wasn't their training or tactics, but their perception. They were a walking message to enemies. We care more than you do. We fight harder. We don't break. That kind of psychological warfare doesn't show up in scrolls, but it breaks armies. And there's something hauntingly modern about it. An elite unit, bonded pairs, non-traditional relationships in a hyper-militarized culture. You can almost hear echoes of modern discussions about cohesion, trust, and what makes a soldier fight. Because in the end, warfare isn't always about resources, ranks, or even formations. Sometimes it's about this: standing in the dust, shoulder to shoulder, knowing the person beside you would rather die than let go of your hand. You wake to incense and riddles, not the clang of armor. The morning is cool, the sky hazy, and a line of sweaty warriors waits outside a cave to ask a god what to do next. You're at Delphi, where decisions that decide the fate of thousands are made based on vague mutterings and burning goat organs. Welcome to the intersection of military planning and mysticism, a place where ancient Greek commanders, for all their logic and brilliance, still pause to ask, but what does Apollo think? You're part of a small delegation today, sent ahead of a campaign to consult the oracle at Delphi. She's a Pythia, a priestess seated above a crack in the earth, inhaling sweet-smelling fumes and speaking in riddles that make fortune cookies look like legal contracts. You kneel. You offer coins. You ask whether your general should march north. Her answer? The path of the lion opens when the moon bows thrice, but beware the feathered dog. So yes? Maybe? You look at your commander. He nods gravely, as if this somehow clarifies everything. It might sound absurd now, but in ancient Greece, divine guidance was tactical data. Before major campaigns, especially the risky ones, commanders regularly sought signs. From oracles, from animal entrails, from dreams. Because while Greek generals trusted in drills, discipline, and clever formations, they also believed the gods could tilt the battlefield with a wink. And here's the real kicker. Sometimes it worked. Historians still argue whether this was just superstition or if religious rituals had practical psychological effects. An army that believed it had divine backing fought harder. A general who obeyed omens might boost morale, create clarity, or delay just long enough for the enemy to make a mistake. You walk through a military camp now, where men are sacrificing goats before dawn. The priest slits the throat, examines the liver, sniffs the smoke. It's not exact science, but to these men, it's strategy. A bad omen? Delay the march. A good one? Prepare for battle songs. Fun fact, some commanders carried portable altars with them into the field, just in case they needed divine input between ambushes. Others employed professional dream interpreters, because apparently, that weird dream you had about drowning in figs might mean your flanking maneuver will fail. And then there's the battlefield omens. You're standing in formation when suddenly a bird lands on your spear. Everyone gasps. Is it a sign? Probably. What does it mean? That depends entirely on which avian themed scroll your priest happens to carry. It wasn't just Delphi. There were dozens of oracles throughout Greece, Dodona, Claros, even temple dreams at Asclepius shrines. Each had its quirks. Some used rustling oak leaves. Others interpreted the way smoke curled. One used dice made from knuckle bones. Fringe theory time? A few ancient sources hint that some generals faked omens to sway their troops. Bad weather? Blame the gods. Need a delay? Claim Apollo, said to wait. It's speculative, but honestly, if you've ever seen a politician quote divine while during a PR disaster, you know how this game works. And yet, the most famous example of cosmic uncertainty remains the lead-up to the Persian invasion. Before the Battle of Salamis, the oracle told the Athenians, "Only the wooden wall shall not fall." Cute interpretation war. Some believed it meant build an actual wall of wood around the Acropolis. They tried. It burned. Others, including Themistocles, believed it meant the fleet of triremes, and that's the version that won. Without that riddle, Salamis may never have happened. You're walking through an army tent now where the general is literally tossing knucklebones into a bronze bowl to decide if tomorrow is good for an ambush. Meanwhile, his lieutenants are sketching maps, calculating angles, and adjusting troop placements. It's an odd harmony, data and divinity, probability and prophecy. Another bizarre tidbit, some cities had battlefield mascots, like sacred animals or symbols blessed by priests. The Spartans carried sacred flutes. The Athenians had owls, both real and symbolic. Imagine entering battle behind a guy who believes a bird gives him +5 morale. And if you think the Athenians were too smart for this, think again. Even Socrates, history's favorite logic troll, claimed to be guided by a personal daimonion, an inner voice or spirit that advised him. If Socrates was consulting invisible whispers, who's going to blame a hoplite for trusting an itchy left foot? You sit now by a cold stream, watching water swirl. A priest nearby is watching it too, claiming it forms the eye of Poseidon. You don't see it. But then again, maybe that's the point. Because the quiet genius here isn't that the Greeks believed the gods controlled war. It's that they left space in their strategy for uncertainty, for instinct, for emotion. Not just logic, not just muscle, but myth. And sometimes, belief in something greater, no matter how irrational, is enough to pull men through terror and into triumph. You hear the sound of hooves before you see him. Dust spirals. Orders barked in a low, firm tone. You stand on a ridge in Macedonia, watching the battlefield shift, not with brute force, not with wild courage, but with a new kind of precision. Cold, calculated, mechanical. Welcome to the era of Philip II of Macedon, the man who stole, bent, and supercharged Greek warfare into something almost unfair. If Epaminondas was the quiet genius with geometry and democracy in his phalanx, Philip is the industrial engineer who walks in, nods, and says, "Cool idea. Let's weaponize it." You're now part of his army. Yes, that's right, you got recruited. You're wearing lighter armor, holding a sarissa, and trying not to impale the guy in front of you. The sarissa, by the way, is a 15 to 21-foot spear that turns the Macedonian phalanx into a hedgehog with control issues. Forget the 8-foot hoplite dory. This thing stabs enemies before they're even in your zip code. And here's the kicker. The sarissas don't just poke. They form a 5-row deep wall of spear points. You could throw a bear at this thing, and it would probably bounce off. Philip didn't invent the phalanx. He just made it longer, denser, faster, and meaner. He studied Theban innovations, especially Epaminondas' oblique line, and said, what if we just never stop improving this? Historians still argue whether Philip truly revolutionized warfare or just adapted pre-existing ideas brilliantly. Either way, the result is undeniable. Greece becomes obsolete the moment Macedon marches. And he didn't stop at spears. Philip looked at cavalry, not as a side gig, but as an integrated strike force. You watch as the companion cavalry, his elite horsemen, ride in tight formations, coordinated with infantry movement. It's a new breed of warfare, combined arms, not just shields and shouts. Picture it. You've got a solid wall of sarissas pinning the enemy in place. Then, from the side, here comes the cavalry, smashing through their exposed flanks like a thunderclap, wrapped in leather and steel. This wasn't improvisation. This was choreography. You remember the Battle of Corinea, 338 BCE. Philip leads the Macedonians against an allied Greek force of Athenians and Thebans. It's a showdown of old versus new. And guess what? The new wins decisively. Philip starts with feints and maneuvering. He lures the Athenians forward with a fake retreat, stretching their line. And then, boom, the Thebans are hit on the left by his son, a teenager named Alexander. Yeah, that Alexander. And the sacred band is annihilated. It's not just victory, it's a rehearsal for empire. You're sitting now by the campfire as the men whisper about Philip's strange style. He drills at dawn, makes soldiers build bridges, dig trenches, measure distances. Some say he once rode alone into enemy territory dressed as a peasant just to scout defenses. Fringe story? Maybe, but it feels like something he'd do. And his reforms go beyond the battlefield. He reorganizes logistics, setting up supply chains, baggage trains, even field medics. Where old Greek armies sometimes packed for war like disorganized tourists, Philip's men march with military precision. Their gear standardized, their formations modular. He also instills officer loyalty through reward, not just punishment. Commanders are promoted based on merit, not birth. Training is constant. Drills are endless. And discipline? Brutal when needed, but always purposeful. You walk through a Macedonian camp and notice the quiet efficiency. Fewer speeches, more sharpening, less poetry, more spears. And yet, Philip isn't all steel and order. He's a political shark. He bribes, flatters, and manipulates Greek city-states into alliances, truces, and grudging admiration. When diplomacy fails, he sends his army. When it works, he sends marriage proposals. The man had 7 wives, at least. One quirky but real anecdote. At one wedding, Philip got so drunk he stumbled into a fight and needed to be saved by teenage Alexander, who gave him an early lesson in "Dad, sit down, you're embarrassing me in front of the army." Still, Philip's genius is in seeing warfare not as a series of battles, but as a system. Every campaign, every reform, every alliance steps in a longer strategy. He doesn't just fight for Macedon. He fights to unify Greece under one command. And he does. After Corinea, Philip forms the League of Corinth, a polite fiction that gives Greece autonomy while letting him call the shots. For the first time in history, the Greek city-states are under one military banner. The next goal? Persia. You look at the map laid out in Philip's tent. The Ionian coast, the Royal Road, Babylon, Egypt. It's all there. But he doesn't get the chance. In 336 BCE, he's assassinated, right before the invasion begins. Historians still argue who did it. Was it a spurned bodyguard? A political rival? A conspiracy involving his wives? Never underestimate a Macedonian ex-wife. Regardless, he dies. And in his place steps Alexander, barely 20, trained on his father's battlefield calculus, ready to finish what was started. You stare at the horizon now, knowing something tectonic just shifted. Philip didn't just cheat at war. He rewrote the rules. You blink against the desert sun now, squinting from the back of a dust-covered horse. The land stretches endlessly ahead. No olive groves, no vineyards, just hard dirt and trembling heat. But you're not lost. You're following a man who moves like he's being chased by destiny. Welcome to the age of Alexander, where Greek military strategy goes global and fast. You're part of a force that just doesn't stop. In just a few years, Alexander the Great, Philip's son and battlefield prodigy, goes from consolidating Greece to conquering everything from Egypt to India. If his father built the machine, Alexander straps it to a lightning bolt. You're there at the Battle of Granicus, Alexander's first real test against Persian satraps in Asia Minor. You're nervous. Crossing a river uphill into an entrenched cavalry line is not, historically speaking, a great idea. But Alexander doesn't wait. He rides first directly into enemy spears, and his troops follow like lemmings with a better PR team. The result? Chaos, then collapse for the enemy. That's the pattern. Speed, audacity, shock. At Issus, he's outnumbered again. The Persian king Darius III brings an army that stretches beyond the horizon. Alexander? He pinches the Persian left flank, punches the center, and sends Darius running. Twice. The man fled 2 major battles and somehow still had fans. And then Gaugamela, the big one. You're standing in a carefully flattened field, watching Alexander stare down an army 10 times his size. Chariots, elephants, cavalry. Darius brought every toy. Alexander responds with angles. He marches diagonally across the battlefield, luring the Persians to overstretch their line. It looks like retreat. It's not. It's controlled distortion. Then he punches a hole through the center with the companion cavalry while the rest of the army holds tight. It's surgical. It's terrifying. It's over. Historians still debate whether Alexander's success came from sheer guts or unmatched tactical thinking. But one thing's certain. No one has moved this far, this fast, this effectively, ever. You camp now in the ruins of a Persian city. The walls are still smoking. The loot is being cataloged. And Alexander? He's already planning the next move into Afghanistan, into India, toward whatever horizon hasn't yet heard of Macedon. And the army? It's not just Greek anymore. Alexander blends Persians, Egyptians, Bactrians, officers, advisors, even bodyguards. He marries Roxana, a local noblewoman. Not just love, optics, a signal that this isn't a conquest. It's a fusion. You glance at your comrades. Some wear Persian sashes now. Some speak 3 languages. The phalanx still fights, still drills, but it's evolving. Alexander adapts his tactics to the terrain, the culture, the enemy. In India, when the chariots come, he adjusts his cavalry movements. When elephants appear, he reforms his ranks to funnel them, targeting drivers first. You're not just marching, you're studying. Fun fact, Alexander carried a copy of the Iliad annotated by Aristotle himself. You know, the tutor who trained him from age 13. You imagine him flipping through it between battles, picking quotes before stabbing someone. And yes, that's another layer. He's not just a killer. He's a philosopher king. He studies cultures, rebuilds cities, founds libraries. He may burn Persepolis in a drunken rage, but he also founds over 20 cities, many named after himself. Modesty? Not his strong suit. Fringe theory time? Some scholars believe Alexander used religious assimilation as soft strategy, claiming divine status not out of narcissism, but to calm conquered populations. In Egypt, he adopts pharaonic rituals. In Babylon, he pays homage to Marduk. In India, he meets yogis. It's not just PR, it's strategic divinity. Still, cracks appear. You're now deep in the east. The men are tired. They miss Greece. The boots are worn, the horse is thinner. The army begins to grumble. Not out of fear, out of distance. They've won every battle. But what's the point if the end keeps moving? At Hyphasis, they finally refuse to go farther. Alexander rages, sulks, then compromises. They turn back, not through safety, but through the Gadrosian desert, where more men die than in any battle. It's strategy at its most spiteful. And when they return to Babylon, Alexander begins administration, planning, infrastructure, trade routes. He dreams of a united empire, a bureaucratic and military hybrid that will outlast him. But in 323 BCE, at just 32 years old, he dies, possibly from fever, poison, or exhaustion. Historians still argue. Some say malaria. Others, a bad liver from drinking like a demigod. Some even say he faked it and disappeared. Regardless, he's gone. And what remains? A shattered, stitched-together empire, held together by generals who immediately start trying to kill each other. But also, a new era of warfare where speed, adaptability, and mixed tactics define the battlefield. You sit by the Euphrates now, watching the sun rise over a once Persian sky. You realize Alexander didn't just use Greek strategy. He mutated it from rigid lines into living systems, from national armies to global ones, from disciplined formation into fluid command. He wasn't a warlord. He was a speedrunner of conquest, rewriting every rule while the rest of the world struggled to catch up. You sit beneath an olive tree now, back where it all began. The breeze carries the scent of dust, distant sea air, and a hint of laurel. There are no marching feet here, no banners, no shouting commanders. Just the soft memory of footsteps on stone and the quiet, undeniable echo of genius. Because what you just walked through wasn't just a history of battles. It was a revelation. Greek warfare, for all its spears and sandals, wasn't about violence. It was about cleverness. You think back to the phalanx, that dense, silent wall of cooperation, to Epaminondas, who turned it sideways and unbalanced the entire Peloponnese, to Themistocles, who didn't outfight Persia, he outthought it, to the walls of Athens, that turned a city into an unbreakable brain stem, to the sacred band, who proved love and trust were stronger than any blade. And it wasn't just the victories that mattered. It was the losses that taught, the retreats that revealed, the betrayals that inspired better defense. Greeks didn't just record their triumphs. They argued about them, dissected them, turned them into plays, symposium debates, and tavern brawls. You recall how they used terrain like a weapon, how they drilled until muscle memory replaced hesitation, how they were just as likely to consult a goat liver as a general. And somehow, both played their part. They built labyrinthine walls, siege towers from nightmares, slingshot snipers who could knock out a helmet at 50 yards, and naval strategies where victory depended on a flute player and an inconvenient coastline. It wasn't just strength. It was a kind of dancing with spears, yes, but also with thought. You traced the dust with your sandal. These were not perfect people. Many were arrogant, cruel, wildly unpredictable. They bickered, backstabbed, switched sides for silver, and sometimes followed omens more than maps. But amid all the madness, they refused to be stupid about war. That's the legacy, and it lingers. Modern warfare still leans on their models. Unit cohesion, command structure, flanking maneuvers, psychological operations, logistics, all traced back to these bearded tacticians yelling over goat stew. But even more than that, Greek warfare teaches this. Strategy isn't just about winning. It's about thinking clearer than the man trying to kill you. About knowing when to charge, when to wait, when to lie, and when to whisper so quietly that your opponent assumes you're not dangerous until it's too late. So now, as the shadows grow long and the dust settles for the last time, you stretch your legs. You've walked the fields of Leuctra, crept through the goat trails of Arcadia, set sail through the straits of Salamis, and stood in the blood-soaked pass of Thermopylae. And in every place, in every dusty whisper, there was one message repeated: brute force fades. Cleverness doesn't. You close your eyes. The sounds of battle fade. The firelight of strategy glows a little longer in the dark. Now breathe. Let all fall away. And sleep with this thought in mind. The sharpest sword in history was never bronze or iron. It was a mind, quiet, patient, brilliant, watching the battlefield unfold like a chessboard and knowing exactly which move would change the world.